Greetings, one and all. This is We Are Reading. My name is Eli Wananda, and we are continuing our session, our series, reading through this big old book, this wonderful study called Yurugu, written by Mama Marimba Ani. So we're going to come back to that in a second. We've got a lot to get through today because it's all about religion and ideology. So yeah, I'm just going to get straight into it. But just to say, for anyone who's tuning in for the first time, We Are Reading is an ongoing series of video live streams every weekend that I do, where we go through books which I feel are important to us as African people, as Black people, books which share ideas and concepts and practices that I think are powerful and insightful and instructive to us as Black people, as we try to understand our position in this world, as we try to understand, what's going on for Black people, why we are in the situation that we're in, and how we can get ourselves out of those situations. So just so you know, the last book that we did was this book right here called The Invention of Women. And this was a book written by Oyeronke Oyewumi, which is a brilliant book all about how our concepts of gender that we're used to kind of assuming to be natural and universal are actually concepts of gender which came from Europeans, and which, at least in the case of the Yoruba people in currently in Nigeria, were not the ones that they had prior to colonialism. So that was a really good book, really paradigm shifting book. And then, as I said, now we are going through this mammoth of a book, which is called Yurugu. And you can see the subtitle there. It's an African-centered critique of European cultural thought and behavior. And it's by Marimba Ani. This book was published in 1994. And so we're looking at just under 30 years, 40, coming up to 30 years since this book was published. And I wish that I'd have read this book when I was an undergraduate, or even before I was an undergraduate, because frankly, in this book, Marimba Ani is going for the jugular of European thought. She is going right to the heart of the root of European thought. She's critiquing it mercilessly. European thought, not European people, European thought. And as I say, this week's conversation, this chapter is on chapter 2. And chapter 2 is all about religion and ideology. It's a 90-page chapter. There's a lot in there. And I'm going to get started straight away. So shout out to you. Make sure that when you do log in, please do like the video, share the video, and let us know that you're here in the comments as well. Shout out and shout yourself out, and we can do this thing. So just to give you a quick overview of how I'm going to try to approach this in the next kind of hour and a half or so. First of all, we're going to look at we're going to introduce the topic, and then we're going to look at Judeo-Christianity, and we're going to point out 3 of the key elements of Judeo-Christianity, which Mama Marimba Ani says are then manifested throughout the next 2,000 years of European aggression against other peoples. And those 3 elements are monotheism, abstract monotheism, the elevation of the written word, and also the dichotomy between Jews or Christians or believers or whatever on one hand, and Gentiles, Goyim, heathens, pagans on the other. So then we're going to actually go through some of that aggression, some of the history of European aggression against others, and how religion has played a fundamental part in that, a central part in European aggression down through the ages, including colonialism and slavery, but even prior to that. And then hopefully, if we have time at the end, we're going to circle back to the Greeks, and we're going to talk about how the concept of religion that the Greeks came up with, this abstract rationalistic religion, we're going to talk about that and how that's led us to what is the dominant religion of our times today in the West, which is scientism. So that is my plan, and let's get on to this. Let's get into this. So first things first is I want to go to page 137, because Marimba Ani says something. This is like halfway through the chapter, but I think this point that she makes is very necessary to talk about right at the beginning, because she basically says, look, I see this as her interpretive key to religious studies. She basically says that, where are we? 137. Well, I'll summarize it. Basically, she says that in order to understand a religion, you really don't start with the religion itself. The first thing to do is to understand the ideology of the people in question. So the terms she uses are utamawazo, which is the culturally structured thought, so the ways of thinking, the cognitive element of the culture, and then an ideology, and then the utamarojo, which is the energetic impulse, the energetic drive. You need to understand those things about a particular people and about that people's relationship to other people. And once you understand that, once you've got a good grasp of that framework, then you can understand the religions of these particular people. Religion is best understood as a reflection of those things, of the utamawazo, of the ideology of a people, and not vice versa. So while Marimba Ani goes through this chapter, she's going to be focusing on that. She's going to keep circling back to the asili of European thought, the utamawazo, the utamarojo of European thought, as it's manifested in European formalized religion. And there's a statement, I like the statement that she makes on page 176 here. I think this is an important kind of like summary of what she kind of talks about in a lot of this book. She says, what we are observing throughout this study is the process of Europeanization, a continuance of what has been called Indo-Europeanization. The mindset, the utamawazo, the utamarojo, the behavioral tendencies that this racial cultural stock possessed, i.e. Indo-Europeans, was continually creating and refining modes through which to express themselves. We are not surprised to see the connections between early Indo-European religion, social organization, and conquest, namely seminal classical Greek thought as expressed in Plato's writings and the Orthodox Church of the 2nd century. They are all part of one ideological tradition, and that's important. She's saying that Greek thought and Christian thought and even scientism to this day, they're not different things really. They're all just different stages, different manifestations of the same process. And each influences and helps to determine the next historical cultural form, a link in the chain that would become Western civilization. So that's kind of the broad sweep of what we're talking about here. We are tracking the process of this European Western civilization, so-called Western Europe, Indo-European culture and ideology. We're seeing different stages from the Greeks, including the Jews, by the way, the Judaics, the Christians, and then on to the scientists, the scientism of today. So the first thing I want to talk about, so Marimba Ani talks about three main elements, or the three main elements I want to bring out here with regard to Judeo-Christianity are, first of all, monotheism. Secondly, the elevation of the written word. And thirdly, the Jew-Gentile dichotomy, or the Christian-heathen dichotomy. So let's talk about these. First and foremost, monotheism. So monotheism, obviously, the understanding that there is a singleness or a unity to the spiritual realm, and that is not something that the Christians or the Jews invented. Obviously, that's something that most other cultures have, this conception of some kind of high single entity, whatever you want to call it, Gaia, Mama Earth, God, whatever you might want to translate it as. That wasn't a new thing. That wasn't a novel thing with the rise of Christianity, Judeo-Christianity. What was new was the way in which the Europeans made that concept of a one God or a oneness of the divine to be a mathematical concept, if you like. So she says, she gives a quote here. She says here on page 114, she says, Stanley Diamond succinctly states the reason for the monotheistic ideal, as well as the reason for its failure as a religious vehicle, in one sentence. And this is the quote: absolutely pure monotheism exists in the realm of mathematics, not religion. And So Marimba Ani goes on to argue that this concept of this abstract concept of this one single God that is just purely abstract, purely single, purely one, was something that is completely detached from anything with regard to lived experience. And so she writes on page 115, she says that maybe. So she says on page 115, monotheism for the European becomes a characteristic of a superior philosophical belief. It's not important here that other cultures exhibit religious concepts that philosophically imply the spiritual priority of a single creative principle, and that the idea of monotheism, of course, came to the West from other experiments with it. So Kemet and other people had this monotheism, quote unquote. But what is significant in this discussion is that absolute and pure monotheism is expressed as an ideal or value in Western European cultural chauvinistic expression, and that it serves as the basis for the devaluation of other cultures. In addition, the expression of this ideal is in part a legacy of the Platonic abstraction. So what she's saying is that monotheism for the Europeans, rather than just being an observation of reality, rather than just being an ontological observation of what perceiving what is, for them it becomes a stick with which to beat other people with. We've got the one God, you've got the wrong God, and so as a result, we're going to have to destroy you, make sure that you switch to the correct God, because your God is rubbish, your God is foolish, your God is, do you know what I mean? Or your gods are not real gods. So Marimba Ani then turns to the Jews, because it's from the Tanakh, which is the AKA the Old Testament. It's there that you really see this development of this fiercely monotheistic cult, if you want to call it that, and fiercely brutal monotheistic cult that kind of develops through them. So she gives this quote from someone called Hugh Schonfeld, which says this: Messianism was a product of the Jewish spirit. It was inspired by the Hebrew reading of the riddle of the creation and the destiny of mankind. Though some of its features did not originate with the Hebrews, they absorbed them and brought them into relationship with a great vision of the ultimate brotherhood of man, under the rule of one God and the Father of all men. And I just want to say, that makes me think of that saying, one God, one aim, one destiny. I'm not critiquing Marcus Garvey or the Garveyite movement, but I just find it interesting that you have this kind of conception of this singularity of, yes, there is one God, there's one people, there's one destiny. You can see how this idea of monotheism does lend itself to centralization and unity, basically. The vision was not simply a cherished ideal, it was associated with a plan for its realization. According to this plan, God had chosen and set apart one nation among the nations of the world, neither numerous nor powerful, to be the recipient of his laws, and by observing them, to offer a universal example. You've heard this, you know this. If you've had any Christian background, you know this stuff. The theocracy of Israel would be the persuasive illustration of a world theocracy, i.e., rule of God, basically. It would be a kingdom, quote, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, witnessing to all nations. Manifestly, according to this view, the redemption of humanity waited upon the attainment by Israel of a state of perfect obedience to the will of God. By so much as Israel failed to meet the divine requirements, by so much was the peace and well-being of mankind retarded. So you see that when you're reading the Tanakh, the Old Testament, you see that development. You see, particularly as it goes on, because you certainly do see an evolution in the thinking in the Tanakh. In some of the oldest texts in the Old Testament, you don't really see any of this sort of stuff. But as it goes on, particularly as they become more and more, the Jews become more and more influenced by Babylonian thought, by Mesopotamian thought. You know, they get ideas from the Babylonians, the Persians, and so forth. Then you start to see these concepts becoming much more complicated and much more, you know, much more grandiose, if you want to say. It moves from like a more tribal thing that like this is just our one nation and we're going to just do whatever we're doing, to we're going to change the whole world once we get our ish together. So you see that developing in the Tanakh. And as I said, monotheism gives the ontological. Marimba Ani says on page 121 that monotheism gives ontological justification for the state, actually, because it figures that if you're going to have rule by God, by a divine, you know, the one God, then it follows that that rule is going to have to be kind of administered by some central entity. So you see the development of that. And actually, you see it. I mean, there's so much. I think one of the things I say about Marimba Ani in this chapter is that she could have went a lot more detailed into the politics behind the formation of Judaism, because there's so much battling and conflict even within the pages of the Tanakh, the Old Testament, let alone you know, between Jews and other peoples. There's so much. There's a battle for the idea, you know, to take control of the ideological heart of the Jewish people, basically. And that battle eventually is won out by the generation of people who come back from the Babylonian exile in around about 500 BCE. Those people, led by your Ezra and your Nehemiah, they're the ones who come back and they're like, right, from now on, we are purely monotheistic, and we don't do any of that kind of, you know, what do you want to call it? Earth-based cosmic religions, you know, based on nature and nature worship, if you want to call it that. And so get rid of all of that. No, we're purely monotheistic. And what they do is that they write back that pure monotheism back into the earlier text to make it seem like that's always been the case. But the Jews were not like that. The Jews initially were a very pluralistic people, as just according to the Tanakh, and they had all of these elements of what you might get called later on paganism. But and a good quote here on page 121, because, and what I like about Marimba Ani is that she doesn't demonize really any of these religions. She points out here, for example, while we're talking about, you know, monotheism becomes a justification for a particular cultural nationalism and politics, she says this: all religions are by necessity culturally nationalistic, in that they profess in some way the specialness, if not the moral superiority, of those who are born into them. And in fact, or most importantly, involve an explanation of the sacred origins of the group. But this is where the difference is. So all religions are basically like that. They're culturally nationalistic in essence. They just are. They're always focused on a particular people. But there is a crucial difference between the way in which the European image of its culture represents its members as advanced on an evolutionary spectrum. This ideological thesis demands a vision of themselves in invidious comparison with others, and therefore in relation to a larger order. One idea, i.e. the sacralization of the group, does not rule out the validity of a plurality of other groups. The other, which is what the Jews and the Hebrews came up with, the other, evolutionary superiority, is a supremacist mindset and only allows for a monolithic reality. So that's the thing with the Jude in the Judeo-Christian tradition. You have this chauvinism, you have this we're better than you, and because they have this, as we covered in the previous sessions, because they have an evolutionary view of human history, i.e. everything is moving and getting better and better and better and better, and of course it's them who are leading this charge of progress and making things better and better and better, then of course they're going to see other people as being further behind and in need of the Jews, first of all, or eventually the Christians, to quote unquote civilize them and bring them up to speed. And of course, that's a violent thing. That's not a product of arguments. That's a product of guns, violence, bloodshed. So monotheism is the first key element. The second key element of the Judeo-Christian formalized religious tradition is the elevation of the written word. And again, we talked about this in chapter 1. The written word, of course, was not invented by the Hebrews, was not invented by the Christians, by the Europeans, and so on. Many other cultures had writing, way back. You could just look at Kemet, for an example, and many other Mesopotamian cultures had writing. But Marimba Ani points out very eloquently the difference here. She says that on page 117, she says, the Judaic tradition is associated with a cultural tool that is generally termed codification in relation to the social norms, sanctioned behavior, and religion of the Hebrew people. The term codification, however, properly refers to the systemic arrangement and preservation of certain aspects of culture. All cultures possess methods and media, i.e. songs, mythology, art, poetry, ritual, that act to standardize in this way. Therefore, all peoples codify what they consider to be the valuable and necessary facts of life. But what's different is this. It is specifically the use of the medium of the written word in this respect that in European parlance is connoted by the term codification, and that in the minds of Europeans is so reverently associated with their cultural heritage. Through the use of the written word, culture becomes recorded, and this recording becomes an impressively cumulative activity, given the impression that the culture itself is more cumulative and therefore within the logic of this same value system, evolutionarily superior to cultures that codify their traditions through other media. And so again, it's there. It's like another manifestation, another way for these Indo-Europeans to assert their so-called superiority over others is through their almost worship of the written text. They say the written text is better than, and I like what she says there about the cumulative nature of it. The idea that when you think about, so for example, in Judaism, they have, what's the thing called? The Mishnah and the Talmud. Was it the Mishnah and the Talmud? Gemara. Mishnah and the Gemara, which together form the Talmud. These are these gargantuan written traditions that they have. And, you can look at that and think, wow, they've got thousands and thousands of pages of written traditions. What do we have as Africans? Say the Yoruba. What did the Yoruba have? Nothing written. It's all oral. And because I'm not born, but raised in the West, and I've absorbed this worship of the written. I constantly have to fight in my head against this idea that if something's written down, it's more real, it's more impressive, it's more, it's stronger. It means more if it's written down than something that's transmitted orally, that's stored and transmitted orally, which is all of our oral cultures. I'm constantly having to fight against it, which is why the Invention of Women book was really important in that regards, because one of the things that Oyewumi points out is that Yoruba traditions which were oral, focused, or they involved a wide range of different senses and ways of communicating: sound, sight, kinetic, whatever. Orality is, I'd say, more cosmic in the sense that it involves a wide range of senses. It's also dynamic, it's socially embedded, it's embodied, the perspectives of the person telling the tradition, the perspective of the person hearing the traditions impact on what the tradition actually is, and it's dynamic, as with the monotheistic thing, the Europeans strip away all of that dynamism. They strip away all of that social nature of religion, if you like. They strip away the situational elements. They strip all that away, and we come up with this dead word that has to be adhered to and has to be obeyed. And there are many critiques. I've seen many critiques of religion that is based on the written text. One of the critiques, for example, was that if you have a religion that's based on a written text, the Quran or the Bible or whatever it is, the Tanakh, the Torah, then you're and you also have this Western mindset, this Indo-European mindset of stripping away all the other things, the nuance and so forth. And obviously, you're going to become. It's like that text is going to become tyrannical. That text essentially becomes like a god. All you can really do is fight over the text itself, fight over the meaning of that particular text. The text can't change. The text can't adapt. The Bible cannot adapt itself to changing. As people learn more, as people are in different contexts and so forth, the Bible can't tell you any of that sort of stuff, and yet you have people who are fighting each other, killing each other, setting up all these denominations and all that sort of stuff over the basis of, I think that this word here in this chapter, in this verse of, I don't know, John means this, but they think it means that. So let's create a new church. It's absolutely going to lead to, it's not going to help with understanding and spirituality. It's just going to lead you to dogmatism. And then Marimba Ani says this on page 118. She says, I'll read it here. She says, the point to be made here is that, is it 118? I'll read it anyway. The point to be made here is the way in which this valued activity related to other Western tendencies of the European asili, already prefaced in early Judaic culture. And this is what she keeps doing. She'll talk a little bit about the details of the religion, and then she'll refer it back to, don't get too bogged down in all of this stuff. Understand that we're looking at it through the prism of the asili, the prism of the Indo-European asili. And she says, when written expression becomes a dominant value, words become binding through writing, and values are perceived as laws. Laws preserved through written codification are more impressive to the European mind than values. This circular process helps to maintain order in lieu of those mechanisms that would be binding in other cultures. Written laws become the mark of European religion. The literate mode helps to impart the illusion of historicity and therefore of universal truth. So again, we've done monotheism, and we've seen how monotheism lent itself perfectly to the European asili. Now we've done the elevation of the written word in religion and seen how that lent itself to this European asili of dominance, domination, and then the third element that we want to talk about with regard to Indo-European religion is the Jew-Gentile dichotomy. Very, very, very important dichotomy here, which to this day is causing havoc with the continent of Africa and the rest of the world, frankly. And well, anyway, so on page 121, and it all follows, it all kind of fits together. This follows from monotheism. For the Jews, those who did not profess the one God ideal, those who worshipped images, as they put it, stupidly, were in fact irreligious, i.e. they had no religion, actually. It was impious and immoral to worship many gods. Moreover, it was stupid. It was backward, and therefore the violent hostility towards all other religions was not only justified, it was morally compelling. And here we find the first concrete statement of what can be called the dichotomy of European chauvinism, the evolution of which we can trace historically and ideologically. And I don't know if I need to, but I'll read a few of these. But basically what you find, the point there she's making is that, in this conception, you have to destroy these heathens, these Gentiles, these goyim, these pagans. You have to destroy them, not even just because it's almost like it's best for them, because they have no religion, they have no sense, they are stupid, and so you have to destroy them. And lo and behold, on page 123, we see in the Torah. In the Torah, I shouldn't laugh. In the Torah, you see command after command after command after command, imploring the Israelites, the Hebrews, to go and literally kill people who don't worship the right God. I'll read one. So there's one, Deuteronomy, which means second law, by the way. Deuteronomy 13, verse 6 to verse 10. And there's also a bunch of other verses. I'll read this. It says, if your brother, the son of your mother, or your son, or your daughter, or the wife of your bosom, or your friend, which is as thine own soul, entice you secretly, saying, let us go and serve other gods, which you have not known, nor your fathers have known, what should you do to them? Should you just say, nah, thanks, mate, I'm not on that. I'm going to just stay with Yahweh. No. You shall not consent to him. Don't listen to him, neither pity him. You shall surely kill him. Your hand shall be the first to put him to death. Imagine that. It's saying that if your child or your wife or whatever says, let's go and worship other gods, it's on you to pick up the rock and bludgeon them to death. Can you imagine? Bludgeon them to death. Like, you shall stone them with stones, and they shall die, because he sought to thrust you away from Yahweh your God, which brought you out of Egypt, from the house of bondage. And there's that whole thing. Peace and blessings, by the way, to everyone in the comments. Peace and blessings to each and every one of and then there's another one here, which is basically all about how when Yahweh is alleged to have said, when he brings you into the land of all these other peoples, the Hittites, the Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, and so forth, Yahweh will deliver them to your hand, and then you must kill them. You must burn down all of their altars. You must completely, utterly smite them, and so on and so on. Hopefully you've heard all of these things before, but that is the Utama Rojo. That is the European Utama Rojo in action, justified by this idea of this Jew-Gentile dichotomy. Now, we're going to come back to this Jew-Gentile dichotomy a little bit later on. But there are, those statements, those violent, blood-curdling statements are littered throughout the Bible. Now, one of the things I'm not sure about is how do people who have children who are in these religions, what do you do with those chapters? What do you do with that? What do you say to the children who are reading that? Oh, yeah, no, that's fine. Yes, God said we have to kill people who want to worship other gods, like absolutely kill them or brutalize them. I just don't know how you would rationalize that to children. I just don't understand. I do not understand how you would rationalize that to children. But that is by the by. So anyway, there you go. You've got the three key elements. Monotheism, the written word becomes central and almost worshipped, and the dichotomy between Jews and Gentiles. These are the key features for the expression of the key ways in which these religions, these Indo-European religions, Judeo-Christianity mainly, are then become the perfect expression of the European Utama Rojo. With the European Utama Rojo, the energetic drive of the Europeans is all about dominance. It's all about control. It's all about separation. We talked about in the first session, objectifying, separating the self, which is the mind, separating the self from everything else, and you have to then dominate everything else. It's all about these hierarchies, isn't it? This is separate. Men are separate from women, and men are better than women. Men have to dominate women, and so we have it occurring with the Jew-Gentile thing. Jews and later Christians are better than the others, and so this is what you must do: smite them. So then Marimba Ani goes on quite a lengthy kind of chronological sweep through European history, to show this stuff in action. And we're gonna talk about it in a second. And something, Desalines, peace out to you, Desalines. You said something there about, guess that's why the Romans. Here we go. I'll put it on the screen here. You said, guess that's why the Romans utilized Christianity for conflict. Well, funny you should say that, actually, because that's exactly what happens. So first of all, you have the split. You have the split between the Jews and the Christians. Christianity comes out from, obviously Yeshua, but he didn't write anything down. The people who wrote the stuff down were your Pauls, in particular, Shaul of Tarsus. He wrote down, half of the so-called New Testament. And obviously Paul was an Israelite himself, was a Hebrew himself. All of the first disciples were Israelites and so forth, Jews and so forth. But you have a split. Some of the people want to stay with the rabbinical Judaism, if you want to call it that. They don't want to accept Yeshua as being the Son of God, the Mashiach, the Messiah. But the Pauls and so forth, they want to accept Yeshua as the Messiah. So there's a split there, and that's all very interesting, but not that interesting to the point. One of the points that Marimba Ani suggests is that probably one of the reasons why the non-Messianics didn't want to become Messianics, didn't want to become Christians, is because they liked their kind of cultural chauvinism, and they just wanted to keep it for themselves. They didn't like this idea of the brotherhood of all men, i.e., let's bring in the Gentiles, and we can all be part of the same kind of house. So that's probably what's happened there. But then we talk about Christianity and Romanism. So Christianity develops, and initially it's persecuted quite mercilessly at times by the Romans, particularly someone like Emperor Nero, burned the Christians on stakes and so forth. Quite horrific. Like when you look at what these Romans would do to certain people, to the Christians. But then what eventually happens is that, as Dessalines, as you said there, the Romans pick up Christianity. And this is a brilliant discussion that Marimba Ani gives us here on page 129. She says this, actually, the section is called The Roman Co-optation to Imperialistic Ideologies, interestingly. So it says, politically, the Roman ideology was the perfect counterpart to this religious formulation, as Arthur Boke's History of Rome characterizes it. Just as the Christian projection was that of a benevolence that sought to share enlightenment in the form of the word with those unfortunate enough to have so far escaped it, so the Roman nationalistic image was that of a people in possession of civilization, prepared to bestow its blessings on barbarians, so-called. Christianity offers salvation to all, providing they all come into the fold, accepting Jesus as the Son of God, therefore gaining eternal life. The Romans offered citizenship to all, providing, as Aristides says, they possessed talent, courage, and leadership potential. Cultural boundaries did not matter. Both were offers of civilization and a supposedly evolutionarily superior way of life. And it could go on. Oh, yeah, I'll go on. These formulations posited a perpetual opposition between those who did not share the ideologies expressed and those who did. Both statements, importantly, contained justifications and directives for the conversion and recruitment of those outside the cultural group with which they were identified with. Perhaps the single most important ingredient shared by these brother ideologies, and actually two arms of the same ideological weapon, is their vision of the world as the turf of a single culture. Any and everyone presently under the ideological and political control of the Christians and Romans was fair game. Never before had ideologies so explicitly stated this worldwide objective. This unique self-image that projects itself as the proper model for all, we can identify as European. This self-image and its projection are part of a centuries-old process through which Europeans miraculously became the universal paradigm for all of humanity. So I'd never really thought about that too tough, but it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? The Romans were already there, gallivanting around the world as known to them, trying to convert more and more of these so-called barbarians to become civilized and part of Pax Romana, Roman peace. And they saw their culture as far superior to any other, even superior to the Greeks in a sense, even though they came from the Greeks culturally, ideologically. But they would see that they were bringing civilization to the Visigoths or the Vandals or the Alaric or the whoever it might be, and even going down towards your Persians and all these. They felt that they were bringing civilization to these people, and then of course Christianity had the same thing, but just couched in slightly different terms. But they had the same thing. We're bringing God to these heathens, and so it was almost inevitable that you would get to a point where, when Emperor Constantine, switches to Christianity, And this happens, of course, in around about 300 and something AD. You see, and Marimba Ani discusses the expediency. Basically, Emperor Constantine needed Christianity because Christianity gave him a tool, like a spiritual, a religious kind of conception, which will aid in his. Oh, let me read it. Let me not summarize here. Here we go. Page 100. This is on page 132 and 133. Where should we read? Yeah, well, okay, I'll read this on page 133. So Constantine becomes a Christian, and maybe he was a believer. I don't know. Maybe he was really a believer, but more importantly it doesn't really matter. We read this. We read on page 133. Constantine's association with the new god, the European god, gave him additional support afforded by religious sanction of his political and military power. And the religion he chose had the advantage of itself incorporating a vision of complete worldwide power and control. Eusebius, who was like a historian of the church, says, quote, thus then the God of all, the supreme governor of the whole universe, by his own will appointed Constantine, the descendant of so renowned a parent, to be prince and sovereign, so that while others have been raised into this distinction by the election of their fellow men, i.e. other emperors, his is the only one to whose elevation no mortal may boast of having contributed. So the church, what you see is the church are like, eventually they're like, yeah, all right, let's do this, come on. And they start to kind of be the cheerleaders of Roman power. They start to say that, yeah, Constantine is God's man. Constantine is God's man on the throne. And guys, I remember very distinctly in around about the year 2002, 2000, when George W. Bush came to power. And I remember, I was almost one of them. I was a very strong evangelical Christian at that time. And I remember people saying, I remember being in prayer groups, people saying, listen, let's pray for George Bush because he's a Christian. Let's pray for him, pray that he has the wisdom to know what to do in leadership and so forth. This is how many Christians think to this day, that people who are in positions of power have been put into positions of power by God. And so it's almost heresy to go against the political leaders. We'll come back to that. In fact, let me talk about it, because Saint Augustine, so-called Saint Augustine, is arguably the most important theologian in the history of Christianity. He basically laid most of the foundations of what we go on to later on consider to be both Roman Catholicism and Protestantism. And what Augustine did is that whereas Constantine sold Christianity to the Romans, Augustine sold Romanism, Roman power, to Christians. He was an ideologue. He was just going on and on and on about how great Rome is and how God. This is one of the things that people need to understand. The Bible, in particular the New Testament, is full of very politically conservative ideas, particularly around this whole thing of all rule, all authority comes from God. And when you read Paul's letters, you have to start to think to yourself, this guy, or if he wrote all those letters, maybe he didn't write all of them. Maybe this is just some Romans who, used his name. But there's things, for example, here in Romans, funnily enough, Romans 13, there is no power but God. The powers that be ordained by God. Therefore, he that resists the power withstands the ordinance of God, and they that withstand shall receive to themselves judgment. And then you've got so it's in the Bible itself. It's in the New Testament. Basically, like, listen, don't oppose the leaders. You must, obey the leaders because God made them leaders. How convenient is that? And then you've got Augustine, who takes that and just runs with it. He says, I can't read all of them because there's so many of them, but let us Here's one, page 146. Because rulers are chosen by divine providence, the servants of Christ are bidden to tolerate even the worst and most vicious of states, and that they can do by and that they can do by realizing that on earth that they are but pilgrims and that their home is not here but in heaven. Isn't that convenient? Don't worry, guys. This leader is terrible. He's killing a bunch of people. He's, these rulers are evil, but it's okay because heaven is your true home. This is just a short sojourn. You're going to go to heaven, and while you're here on earth, God commands you to obey your leaders. And it just goes on and on. I'm not going to read all of the. I won't read all of them because, to be fair, it's not just about Augustine, but. You see this. You see basically the roots of what we find later on in colonialism, slavery, and so forth. All rule comes from God. You got the pagans and the heathens. The Christians and the pagans. The pagans must be dominated. They must be controlled. There's only one God. All the other gods are idiots and not real, and so forth. It's a perfect devilish blend of militarism and expansionism, basically. What you find as well is that as time goes, I'll come back to that. The other point, sorry, I wanted to make here, which I didn't talk about, was heresy, because obviously you've got Christianity. Christianity rises up. Augustine, makes Christianity the state religion, but at that time, Christianity was a very plural world. There were a range of different ideas about what God is, what God, was, who exactly Yeshua was. Was he God? Was he man? Was he both? What is God? Was God just one entity, or were there three of them in one or two? There were Arians, for example, believed. Jehovah's Witnesses are basically a version of Arians. This guy called Arius, and they taught that there was just two, not the Holy Trinity. It was the Holy Binity, the Son and the Father, and that's it. No Holy Spirit. And then others just believed that the Father was the only God, and then Yeshua. There's all this division, all these different sects. Gnostics were around, and so forth. And so what Constantine does is he commands the Christians, and he sponsors the Christians, loads of councils, beginning with the Council of Nicaea, to basically get the story straight, get your religion together. It has to just be one story, and that's going to become the orthodoxy. And then obviously eventually what you're going to have to do is go and kill these other people who believe otherwise. And so you have the development of orthodoxy, so that Christianity can speak in one voice, which will then be a much better tool for Roman power. And so you have a suppression of heresies, particularly the Gnostics, the Christians, the Orthodoxies, whatever you want to call them. The Orthodox Christians hated Gnosticism in particular, because Gnosticism was more in tune, I suppose you'd say, with earth-based religions. They were much more about experiential transcendentalism. They were more esoteric and so forth, and more open and pluralistic. And we couldn't have that. They could, the developing orthodoxy had to get rid of the Gnostics, because the Gnostics would be a thorn in the side of any centralizing kind of activity. So the Gnostics get brutally suppressed and killed. Roman paganism gets brutally suppressed and killed. Eventually you get to a point where the church and the state become basically indistinguishable. And Marimba Ani points out that the term Christendom, I'll read here. It remains here to cite only a very few of the instances of the church's support of the European imperialistic venture. During the greater part of the medieval period, church and state were barely distinguishable. Or, more properly speaking, the church was more powerful than the state. And the term Christendom reflected the intimacy of this relationship. Christendom was the term used to basically refer to the geopolitical bloc of Europe. And it was called Christendom. And by the way, that Christendom was very much, European. The European identity was very much developed in contradistinction to the rise of who? Guess who? Obviously, guess who? The rise of Mohammedanism, Islam. Islam came. And so that's where you really get this, the Europeans really start to coalesce around the idea of Europa as being their identity, and they start to see themselves as Europeans, and they see themselves as Christendom. Christianity and Europeanness are basically one and the same things. Now, it's easy to say that, it's easy to point to the Crusades and say, yeah, the Crusades, because they went, and hopefully you guys all know that what the Crusades are about. These Europeans basically, would go and, they'd go to Palestine and try and, win back Palestine from the, what they call them? The Mohammedans? I can't remember what the word is they call the Muslims, but that's, these Crusades were very, very violent Crusades. I've seen you hear stories about, the Crusaders wading through, rivers of blood as they've liberated the Holy Land from these heathens, virtual heathens. But that wasn't the start of it, because you see, for example, there's a quote here that Marimba Ani gives us on page 152. During the 10th century, when the kings of Wessex were winning back the Midlands and Northumbria from the heathen Danes. So, quick context: what we call England now wasn't England 1,000 years ago, or a little bit over 1,000 years ago. It was only 1,000 years ago that England became unified. Before then, it was, you had the Britons, the Celts, the indigenous peoples. Then you started getting these Germanic peoples coming over from places like Saxony and Jutland, I think, and Anglo-Saxons, they come over, the Germans start to, then you've got the Danes, the Scandinavians coming more in the north. And so you had all these different kind of states within what are now the British Isles, and they were fighting for supremacy and so forth. And of course, what happened, if you know that the Wessex, the Wessex was basically the entity that would become England. They were the Germanic, the Anglo-Saxons in the southwest who would eventually triumph over the Danes, and they became Christians first. So, is it King Arthur? I think it's King Arthur. I can't remember his name, but this guy became Christian, and so these wars that they were fighting with each other were all couched in religious terms. So during the 10th century, when the kings of Wessex were winning back the Midlands and Northumbria from the heathen Danes, notice the language, other heroic kings were saving Christendom from its heathen enemies in the German lands. The Saxon king, Henry the Fowler, drove back the Danes in the north and the fierce Hungarian archers in the east. His grandson, Otto the Great, destroyed a great Hungarian army in 955. These men shared with the men of Wessex the honor of saving Christian Europe, and the defeated heathen were converted to the Christian faith. So, yeah. So, and so the point is that the European identity becomes inextricably linked to Christianity, and the European Utamarrojo, which is pre-exists Christianity, pre-exists Judaism as a religion, that dominating Utamarrojo, that energetic drive to dominate and to control and to aggress, is perfectly filtered through Christianity, Judeo-Christian thought. So then we get onto colonialism. We've touched on a fair amount of colonialism in our last couple of sessions, and even in the last book as well with Oyeronke Oyewumi. But hopefully you know that Christianity was absolutely the vanguard. The missionaries and so forth were the vanguard of colonialism. And the more I think about this, the more I'm beginning to come to the opinion that, well, I struggle to understand how someone could be a Christian and also be anti-colonial, if you like. It's hard for me to understand that, knowing that Christianity was the tool used to dominate us and to butcher us and to kill us and so forth. And we're going to talk about that now here in this section. So colonialism, one of the first things is that colonialism was always couched in humanitarian terms, and it still is. When you think about, when people talk about the way that they treat Black people, African people, and others, it's always couched in humanitarian terms, isn't it? So here are some good quotes here. So there was, it's altruistic. So no, we must kind of going back to that point I made earlier, which is that, the Judeo-Christians saw it was a moral imperative for them to convert the rest of the world to their religion. It was a moral imperative for them to actually go and kill people who didn't believe. Let me give you a little story, actually. Sorry, before I go into this, a little story. I used to be very heavily involved in Christian online forums. So this is like in the mid 2000s when the internet was still so chaotic and fresh and vibrant. And I remember I was on a forum called Holy Culture Radio, which is like hip hop. Holy hip hop is a holy hip hop kind of thing. And anyway, this guy was a Calvinist. Calvinism is basically Augustine's beliefs repackaged by a guy called John Calvin. Anyway, this guy really believed in this idea of theocracy, and that, yes, governments should be controlled by the church, and the church should basically do whatever they want to do through this power that they have. And one of the things, when you read Christian history, when you read, for example, about the Reformation, you'll find that when your John Calvins and your Martin Luthers kind of got independence from the Roman Catholic churches, it wasn't like they decided to then set up a pluralistic, open, society where religious freedoms were tolerated. No, they were just as brutal as the Roman Catholics were. They turned on other Protestants, other non-Catholics, and they hated them even more than they hated the Roman Catholics. And so, for example, they would burn people. They burned one guy at the stake, who Servetus. I can't remember what he did, but you could do things like print a Bible, or preach that baptism should be done when you're a certain age, because these Protestants still believed in infant baptism. And if you taught against that, and if you started to do adult baptism, you could get killed and burnt at the stake. So I asked this guy who believed in all that, so if we were hypothetically in a situation like that, where, we had a church, a theocracy, would you kill me if you were commanded to by your leaders? And this guy said, yeah, I would. He said, yes, I would kill you because, I would have to do it because theocracy. And there you go. This is a rational guy, sensible, intelligent, apparently guy, Black African American guy. But he told me to my face, I would kill you if we lived in a theocracy and I was commanded to kill you for being a heretic. So that was one of the my key sort of steps out of that religion and that whole thing. I just thought, okay, what's this about? Why does he think like that? And it makes sense, because he was just channeling this Ultima Rojo, this Asili, this European Asili. Anyway, so what the reason I said that is that belief of his, that commitment to want to kill people based on religion, is a manifestation of all of this stuff that we're talking about. So in colonialism, you see there's some quotes here which Marimba Ani gives with regard to how they talked about it when they were going to, when they were going to colonize and take our stuff. So, for example, here we go. These are proceedings from the British Parliament in 1935, 1937, concerning the question of Aborigines. And so the responsibility of the committee dealing with this question was to investigate government policy. And then it says this: native inhabitants or countries where the British settlements are made, and to the neighboring tribes, in order to secure to them the due observation of justice and the protection of rights, to promote the spread of civilization among them, and to lead them to the peaceful and voluntary reception of the Christian religion. So you see, who wouldn't want civilization? Sounds good. Justice sounds good. Yeah, I like the sounds of this. Justice and protection of rights. Yeah, that's how they spun their kind of violent colonial rampages through our amongst our people and many other people. And then someone says here, quotes here saying, between 1830 and 1870, the dominant British attitude toward Africa became more conversionist than ever. The Niger expedition itself was a large-scale public effort to convert barbarians to Western ways. The middle decades of the century represent indeed the height of conversionist sentiment. And it goes on and on and on. Oh, this is good. I like this. I really like this this thing here. Someone. So I'll read this. Page 154. This is Marimba Ani speaking. The tendency to ignore the political implication of this kind of humanitarianism, so called, is displayed consistently in Western social theory. In Race, the History of an Idea in America, Thomas Gossett argues that the idea of the unity of mankind is inherent in Christianity and that it has acted against racism, which he sees as distinct from and somehow bad as compared with the good intentions of conversionism, i.e., converting people. And then, quote from this person: slavery, it has sometimes been argued, was first considered in the colonies as an interim institution designed to convert both Negroes and Indians to Christianity. It is interesting, however, that among the colonies of the 17th centuries, it is the heathenism of the Negroes and Indians, rather than their race, which is emphasized as a basis for their enslavement. So this insane man is saying that, trying to big up Christianity and say, well, listen, guys, this wasn't racism. When you look at the historical colonial records, they weren't racist. They weren't against these people because of their race. They were against them because they were heathens, which is, this guy's trying to say, that's better, that's all right. And then this statement from Marimba Ani is just like, blam. She says, the fine distinction between the connotations of heathen and nigger may well be interesting to Gossett, but from an African-centered perspective, they become one and the same. Both denote objects of European imperialism. Of the two, and this is interesting, of the two, the concept of heathen is perhaps potentially more debilitating, as it is more rapidly adopted by the oppressed herself and incorporated into her own self-image, which I thought that's just such a powerful point that, I suppose what's my thing from that? It's kind of like you can remove the racial terms, you can remove the racial epithets and so forth. You can remove any explicit reference to race, but just that heathen, that application of this term heathen, and this application of this, this converting our people outside, to this Christian faith, is the same thing. It's all the same thing. There's no real difference, and because all of it is about, as someone made this comment earlier, all of it is about being alienated so that you can serve these aliens. That was from a quote from someone called Baba Wekesa, who I just heard this quote today. But the point is that it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? You don't try and take a moral high ground and say that, well, we weren't racist, we just hated you because you were heathens. It's the same bloody thing, actually. So, and that point as well about that, actually the heathen term is probably more dangerous, because the average black person with Wekesa, thank you family, Wekesa Madzimoyo, who I've not heard of him until today, and I've seen some videos of him. I'm gonna go and check out. He made this point that we've been alienated to serve aliens, and that point as well about that's how powerful religion is, because religion you don't need the overt racism with all of this conversionism. You don't actually need that, the overt racism. You just couch it in terms of humanitarianism and so forth. And this is what makes these Judeo-Christian religions so appealing, so dangerous to us, is because we buy into this universalist language, and then we inject this thing into our veins, thinking, oh, that's all right. Yeah, this is just progress. This is just humanitarianism. This is just civilization. Give me some of that. It's like, fam, you're still injecting yourself with something that's going to kill you, culturally speaking. So that's that. Yeah, man. The Tafari Melisizwe. What name, by the way? Tafari Melisizwe. Lovely, wonderful name. Yeah, shout out to the. Okay, I'll come to the comments in a bit. But please, to everyone, if you haven't signed up, then do sign up, please, to the le1under.substack.com. But I'm not trying to waste time with that. Let's get on with it. Let's go on with it. So, so here we go. So, where are we? I'll skip a few bits here. Yeah. So there are many statements in this chapter, page 155, 156, which show the intricate relationship between slavery and colonization and Christianity. This is an interesting point, which I'm gonna read here. This is about how the church divides up the world for European subjugation, and here it is. It says Chapman Cohen, in a work published in 1931, says not only were there thousands of unfreed slaves in the possession of ecclesiastics even 1,000 years after Gregory had published his wait, is it the right one? Where are we? Beyond reproach. Oh, I'll skip that. I'll skip. Anyway, there's basically these sections here are pointing out the intricate relationship between European imperialism and Christianity, and it's just all there. Just the other day, the Roman Catholic Church apologized for this thing called the doctrine of discovery, which is basically a teaching by the church that basically gave the the bloodthirsty conquistadors and others, gave them justification to go off there and civilize the world with guns and bayonets and disease and so forth. And so the church recently apologized for it, pseudo apologized for it. I say pseudo apology because what they said, if you read it carefully, they said, "Oh yeah, we're really sorry that people misused church teachings to go and do colonialism and slavery and that. And actually, we're very anti-slavery because we freed some slaves and we supported the rights of the natives and so forth." It's just such a piece of ideological sophistry. But it's just, even the church, you just need to go to the churches themselves to see, they were all in on this. Obviously, the Pope divided up the world. They gave part of the world to Spain, part of the world to Portugal, and said, "Go and make disciples out of these heathens," and on and on and on and on. But one very important point that Marimba Ani tells us here is that the militarism, it's very obvious. The brutal military stuff is very obvious to see and very important. But actually, the non-military, the less obvious manifestations of this colonialism, European Christian colonialism, are actually the more dangerous. So, for example, page 162, Marimba Ani says, "The phenomenon of cultural imperialism, if it is to be distinguished from its strictly militaristic political and economic components, is that which strikes the death blow at a people's ability to resist aggression. There has never been in the history of the human race more expert dealers of that blow than Europeans. They alone have realized the full strategic potential of destroying the ideological life of a cultural entity. Christian ideology is an ideally fashioned weapon for the destruction of the self-image and value system of African and other non-European peoples. With its delusionary rhetoric of love and peace, its debilitating image of the non-white, i.e. non-European backward heathen, and its false universality, it has succeeded where guns could never, in tearing people from the cultural base necessary for the formulation of an effective self-deterministic ideology. A Christian with a gun in the armed forces is one thing. He might end up with a spear in his back. But a missionary with a Bible and a well-meaning smile who speaks of eternal love is wholly different. It takes a great deal of political sophistication to recognize him as a potential menace." So, I mean, we know that, don't we? But the wars and so forth, actually, yes, very, very important, very, very necessary to understand all of this stuff. But it's the cultural imperialism that's the hardest thing. So Marimba Ani actually, she says that it's hard work to sort of pass out some of this stuff, but she does some of this herself already. So on page 143, 144, she points out that Christianity fosters a warlike expansionist kind of mindset for the Europeans, but for the colonized, it fosters docility, passivity, resignation, and so forth. And this reminds me of what Amos Wilson talks about in the Blueprint for Black Power, which I've got here, which maybe one day we can go through this book. But I mean, gosh, Yurugu is a big book. Blueprint is even bigger. So we'll definitely dip into Blueprint as we go along. But he says something on page 71, which I do want to quote. By the way, Marimba Ani and Amos Wilson were very close, very close. They worked together a lot. When Amos Wilson died, Marimba Ani had so many kind words to say about him. And I see them as cut of the same cloth, basically. Extremely sharp, extremely African-centered, extremely devoted to their people. And they've left us 2 books, which should be required reading for every single African person who is interested in actually being African. Anyway, he says on page 71 of his book that the Christianity taught by the slaves, the Christianity taught what? To bring attention to the fact that Christianity taught the slaves by their masters. Okay, the Christianity taught to the slaves by their masters or by the dominant whites served to rationalize and justify the status quo of white mastery and black slavery. White dominance and black subordination, white command and black obedience. This ambivalent function of Christianity, as taught to African slaves, remains embedded in the church theology of the contemporary black church. So, I mean, yeah, I'll carry on reading. This theology and the ethics derived therefrom function to sustain white domination by other groups, and black subordination by means of inducing blacks to believe in and follow what appears to be divine, objective, race-neutral sayings, proverbs, ethical rules, and moral preachments. However, any cursory examination of the mundane outcome of the belief in and practice of such preachments is startlingly different and almost completely opposite for whites and blacks. And so, that is the impact. That is what Christianity has done and continues to do to our people. Let me share something. I want to share tweets, a very important tweet, because it's like this situation is like a parable almost of what I've just said there. There's this guy. So in Uganda's where I'm from, where my family's from. So in Uganda, there's the leader of Uganda currently is Yoweri Museveni. He's been leader for far too long, and essentially, he's basically a dictator. Now, Yoweri Museveni has a son called Muhoozi, who is, there's a chance he might be the next in line. Once. Oh, well, here we go. I was gonna show this, but let me show you. And look at this guy's page. Let me show you the page now. Present, share screen. Muhoozi. There we go. Right, hopefully you can see this. Look at this guy's page. This is Muhoozi Kainerugaba. He is General Muhoozi. He fought during the wars of the 1980s, and is the son of Yoweri Museveni. And look what he's got in his profile picture. It's Lord Jesus. White Jesus. Could he not have even bothered to put a black one just to sort of soften the blow a little bit? No, he couldn't. Now, there you go. Look, it's saying Happy Easter. Easter's coming tomorrow. Yeah, very, very lovely. And now, let me see how can I find it? There was Muhoozi misogynist. Anyway, he the other day, bear in mind, he's like a powerful figure, potentially next in line. What on earth? Sorry about that. Potentially, there we go. Potentially next in line to the throne, if you want to call it that. And this person here she is. Where is she? This person here basically outed him, like pointed out that this guy is a misogynist. basically, first of all, she said, look, this guy needs to stop being an idiot on social media. How can he be so clueless on social media? Then Muhozi, I'm sorry, I can't find the actual quote, but Muhozi basically comes back to her and says, oh, she's just annoyed because she's ugly. I'm so sorry, I can't find the actual tweet, but he basically comes back and says, yeah, she's just annoyed because she's ugly. And here we go. Here's a news story about it. Yeah, he said, oh, she's just annoyed that she's ugly. That was it. So my point is that you've got here in contemporary East Africa, in Uganda, this very powerful person who could well become the next president of Uganda, basically can't take criticism from this woman. So he reverts to outlandish, open, in-your-face anti-womanness, if you want to call it that. And what makes it worse is that a bunch of people basically chiming in and say, yeah, she is ugly. Yeah. Da, 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 da. And I'm like, this tells me it was like a parable for the nefarious impact on Africa and Black people of this religion, of this Christianity, and everything that came along with here we go. This is it. Look here. So on that tweet where she said, this guy needs to sort himself out, Muhozi says, I think she's jealous that nobody finds her attractive. And then even tomorrow morning, she'll still be ugly. Some conditions are incurable. Can you imagine that? So that, where are we? Stop sharing. There we go. The point there basically is that this religion and the other ones, Islam as well, this doesn't talk about Islam in this particular book. But the point there is that the nefarious impact of Christianity on our people must be confronted, must be identified, and must be rooted out, in my opinion. And then just one more point about Christianity that I wanted to make here is that Christianity, Marimba Ani makes a really, really important point here, that Christianity breaks down cultural nationalism because of its idea, this concept of the brotherhood of man. So on page 144, Christianity, brotherhood of man. Yeah, basically, where are we? Oh, sorry about this. Oh yeah, here we go. Yeah, what is new about the teachings of Jesus, of the Christianity? This is how she writes it, actually. I like this. Marimba Ani, very careful with her words. She says, what was new about the teachings that purported to have resulted from the activities of Jesus was that they proclaimed that one was to treat members of other cultural groups in this way, i.e. as brothers. And more importantly, one was to treat one's enemies in this way. Enemies being those who were hostile to one's cultural group or one's family. What she's saying is that Christianity and religions like it, they basically they say, listen, people who are in the faith are your brothers and sisters. You treat them X, Y, Z, like your family. People who are outside of the faith, no, they are outside. They're heathens. So treat them accordingly. This directive is, of course, debilitating and castrating to political cultural nationalism and counter to demands of self-determination. This feature, along with that of the direction of attention towards another world in which justice is sought, may certainly combine to form a new statement, but it can hardly be called a politically revolutionary one. And that point she made there was basically confronting the liberation theology. She's basically saying, listen, this is not liberation. Liberation theology is hopeful, but it's just not in keeping with the reality, the facts of Judeo-Christian history, Judeo-Christian ideology, and the European Ultima Rojo just overall. So that's that. All right, please make sure that you like the video, guys, if you can. As we go now into probably the last section here, which I want to talk about, which is patriarchy. I've just talked about patriarchy, funnily enough. So I've introduced it with this Muhozi guy. And basically what you see is that, we hopefully, all right, let's just run it through. When Marimba Ani points out that the Greeks, Plato, Aristotle, Paul of Tarsus, the role of women in Jewish public life, in all of these settings, women are down, women are suppressed, women are silenced. I mean, 176. Maybe some of you don't know this. I don't know. Hopefully you do. When I was a Christian, I knew about all this and I had answers. I was like, oh no, it's just for the culture of the time. It's like, if this is just for the culture of that time, that particular place, why are you telling me that this particular religion then is a universal religion that applies to all people everywhere? Can't have it both ways. Do you know what I mean? Like when it suits apologists, they want to tell you that, oh, it's just for the culture of the time, you know, where there's bad stuff that talks about, I don't know, slaves obey your masters. No, that's just for the culture of the time, not for now. But when it's, you're going to go to hell if you don't, I don't know, believe in Jesus. So, no, that's universal. That's for everybody, everywhere, throughout history, But so we've got obviously Paul of Tarsus says things like, and Paul, he wasn't coming up with anything new. Paul of Tarsus was basically just reflecting the rabbinical teachings which he grew up in. So when he says things like, I do not permit women to teach or to have authority over a man, and when he says things like, let a woman learn in silence with all submissiveness. Oh yeah, I permit no woman to teach or to have authority over men. She is to keep silent. He was just reflecting his culture. But that culture, and this is the point with this Judeo-Christian religions, these cultures are elevated to be something that's universal for all people, regardless of what these modern gender inclusive Christians want to say now. It's like, no, that's what it teaches. And then you see, that carries on. So by the late 2nd century, the Orthodox community, this is on page 176, came to accept the domination of men over women as the divinely ordained order, not only for social and family life, but also for Christian churches. And then obviously you have, to this day in some of these churches, women can't become leaders because leadership is male, because God is male, by the way. And some of these people will die on that hill, like, God is male. I remember I had this pastor, and I remember asking him about this, like, when you say God is male, what do you mean? Like, does he have a penis? Like, what do you mean? What do you mean by God is male? And why is it so important that God is male? Because I just couldn't get it. I couldn't understand. Like, is he a person then with genitalia? What is it? Like, what's this all about? But these people are adamant. You do not call God her or she or anything like that. There's a Bible translation called the Amplified Version, which I think uses gender inclusive pronouns for God, and the evangelicals and fundamentalists absolutely hate all that stuff because they are channeling the real essence of the Ultima Rojo, which is men are better than women from Plato onwards. So this is a quote from something called Timaeus, which I think is by Plato. It says, the philosopher maintains his closeness to the divine, moving upward in the scale of beings, while men who fail in the effort of philosophy are punished by becoming women in their second lives. Bloody hell, no. Anything but that. No woman can be a philosopher. She must wait until after death, when her soul might be reincarnated in the body of a man. And then again, later on, the male sex is assimilated to the divine part of the soul. And remember, this is Plato. This isn't Paul of Tarsus or whatever. This is Plato, 500 or something BCE. Men, like that divine soul, must be protected from the miasma, the pollution represented by women. That worst part of the soul, like unto women, is superior to the worst part of the body, which is like an animal. She says women were associated with the body, which was inferior to the mind. Thus, they, like the body, served the soul, the head, the philosopher, the male. Yeah. So there's like quotes from these Greeks, basically showing that what the Christians did, what the Jews did with regard to the women, was something that the Greeks also did. What is that? What's that all about? Why is it in this Indo-European Asili? Why is it that women have to be at the bottom and men at the top? Well, another great scholar of ours, Cheikh Anta Diop, had a theory called the dual cradle theory, the two cradle theory. And this two cradle theory, I'll summarize it. I won't read the whole thing from here. But this dual cradle theory posits or suggests that what happened was the Europeans, the Indo-Europeans, came from a particular environmental setting. And in this environmental setting that they came out of, life was extremely harsh, was extremely brutal. The earth, the land, and so forth that they inhabited in the what do you call it? The steeps, the Caucasus Mountains, those steeps. Very, very tough life, very, very harsh life. And so they developed a culture which reflected that environment. This culture was a nomadic. I mean, I'll read a little bit of this here. Yeah, the environment. This is on page 171. Very important theory, this two cradle theory. The environment of the northern cradle was harsh, cold, relatively infertile, lacking in opportunities for agriculture. Adaptation to this environment produced a series of cultural and social characteristics, among them aggressiveness, individualism, the predominance of meat in the diet, interesting, and monogamy, interesting. There were other characteristics, but they will be discussed more thoroughly, along with a deeper elaboration of Diop's theory in subsequent chapters. It is interesting to note that Diop is arguing against Eurocentric interpretations of back. What's this? I'll leave that bit. But that's the point, that these Europeans, they came out of those mountains, and life was so hard, so they developed this culture. And then there's this quote from Diop, says, in this existence, which was reduced to a series of perpetual migrations, the economic role of the woman was reduced to a strict minimum. She was only a burden that the man dragged behind him. Outside her function of childbearing, her role in nomadic society is nil. It is from these considerations that a new explanation may be sought to account for the lot of the woman in Indo-European society. And then, so by contrast, the southern cradle, let me read this. This devaluation of the female role was incorporated into their religious practices. Among the nomads who had no permanent residence, cremation took precedence over burial, and fire, which gave much needed warmth in a land with little direct or close sunlight, was worshipped, quote unquote. Fire rituals can still be witnessed in some European communities. By contrast, according to Diop's theory, in the southern cradle, the earth takes prominence as agricultural activity and fertility abound. The population is more peaceful, secure, and sedentary. Women play a critical part in the economy and in subsistence. The female principle is the foundation of the cosmological conceptions. And then there's one other part. There's another section where she here we go. Yeah. So she quotes from Elaine Pagel's The Acceptance. All right. Let me summarize it. Basically, she makes the point that with these earth-based cultures, which were, in the southern cradle, women were an intrinsic part of the cultures, and we saw that when we looked at the invention of women, and we considered the role of Obinrin in Yoruba society. We saw that actually, being a woman did not mean that you couldn't do this and you couldn't do that. And being a man didn't mean that only you could. There wasn't. Oyewumi argues there wasn't that gender division really outside of around childbirth and rearing of children. So that confirms the dual cradle theory, at least as far as the Africans is concerned. But what Marimba Ani also talks about is how these earth-based religions, which also there were some in Europe as well, in other parts of the world, these earth-based religions were very much focused on the cycles of nature, the cycles of, the seasons, seasonality, and so forth. And in particular, they were very, very, very respectful and focused on fertility. Funnily enough, I'm recording this on, Easter weekend, Ishtar. Hello, Ishtar. The word Easter comes from Ishtar. Ishtar was this deity in, was it Babylon or one of them, that was a deity of fertility, Ishtar. And so it's funny that Easter has been co-opted and corrupted to put a man in the middle of it, but fertility is all about female, isn't it? The females are the fertile ones. Fecundity, I believe. So they were very, very respectful and they were reverent toward fertility, the fertility of the earth, the fertility of nature, and so forth. And so obviously it makes sense that in that women would play an integral part of that, because in the human realm, fertility, is primarily about female fertility. And so what you have is that the Europeans detached themselves, as we talked about in the first couple of sessions on Yurugu, detach themselves from nature. They see nature as something to be separated from, dominated and controlled, not something to interact with, not something that's living, not something to learn from, not something to live in harmony with. Nature was to be dominated and ideally destroyed if possible. And so obviously if you're detaching yourself and objectifying nature in that way, and then you come up with these male gods and male-centered religions, and obviously you're also going to start to remove women from the central place that they had in these earth-based religions, to the divine feminine. And that's something that you see in the Torah, in the Tanakh. You see the prophets are railing non-stop. They're railing against, these bloody Israelites, they've got these sacred groves and they've got these goddesses that they keep, reverencing and venerating and so forth. Cut them down, cut down the trees, and it's there. It's like, cut down these sacred groves, Religion is not about nature. Religion is not about the earth. Religion is not about these things. No, get rid of all of that. Cut all these things down. Instead, we've got this abstract concept of God, which you must worship. And it's an idea that, necessitates males being at the center of everything, males being in the lead and so forth. So when General Muhoozi in Uganda makes that comment that he does to that sister, he is merely channeling the Utama Rojo, the Utama Wazo, the Asili of the Indo-Europeans, which in itself came from Marimba Ani and Chekanta Diop and many others argue, came from their interaction with their environment that was so harsh and so on and so forth. So that's that. I will now do I'm going to just do one last section now. I wasn't able to get right to the end of the chapter, unfortunately. There was one last section I didn't quite get to, but I did go through this section. I did go through the part about rationalism, religion as being rationalistic. So I'm going to talk about this, and then we'll call it a day. So to summarize, this is on page 178. I will summarize most of it. I won't read too many quotes. But Marimba Ani discusses how the Greeks, so going back to, we talked about the Jews and the Christians and so forth, but going back to the Greeks, and in particular Plato, and she talks about how in this chapter, earlier on in the chapter, she talked about how Plato had this concept of, or this idea of the abstract ideals. Basically, he saw that the abstract ideals were the real thing. Everything else was just the derivative of it. The abstract ideals are the real thing. So there's this whole thing called the Euthyphro dilemma. I don't know if you've heard of this Euthyphro dilemma. Basically, the question that Plato asked this person, is something holy or pious because it's intrinsically holy, or is it holy or pious because the gods say it's holy? And this was something, if you're in religious circles, this is a very important question, because when you are reading in the Bible that God supposedly told the Israelites to go and kill men, women, and children because they just happened to be of the wrong ethnicity and worshipped the wrong God, you have to ask yourself, well, I mean, if someone said that today, if someone stood up in a church today and said, guys, we need to go and kill all those people over there in that mosque because, or whatever. We need to go and kill a bunch of people because they're the wrong religion. Most people would be like, you crazy, man. Have you lost your goddamn mind? Most people hopefully would say that. So when you read something like that in the Bible, you should be thinking, what the hell? And so that was one of the main thing that eventually led me out of Christianity was that I just pondered it and pondered it and pondered it. I could not make head nor tail of it. All I could hear was, this is just genocidal violence being given a divine, veneer. And I weren't really about that. But one of the things that people would tell me is that, well, if God's commanded it, so it must be holy. It must be fine. Whereas I was like, no. But anyway, Socrates, sorry, not Plato. Socrates convinces this person that actually things are holy in and of themselves, which seems reasonable. But then Socrates, he then goes on to basically he appeals to abstract ideals to justify himself and his behavior, and he argues that these ideals must be abstractions, complete pure ideal abstractions, not in any way derived from human experience, from life, from culture, anything like that. None of those things can tell us anything about whether something is good or not. Where we must look for where we must look to find out if something is moral is whether is abstract ideas. So on page 113, Marimba Ani says Socrates is talking about an absolute, unchanging reference point, the grounding of reason. And then later on that same page, I'll read it here. These arguments of Socrates make the assumption that there is but one system of logic, one mode, and that this comes to appear logical within the epistemological confines of European culture. Plato defined the good with the true, and for him, this means the mathematically true. So I don't know if I'm explaining this clearly. You definitely need to read this for yourself, the early part of the chapter, page 110 onwards. But Marimba Ani basically criticizes Socrates and Plato for conflating morals with mathematics. And the point is that, because Socrates basically says that, these ideals, such as truth, beauty, goodness, whatever, these ideals are mathematically true. They're not just moral, they're true. They're mathematically true. And so it sort of, you start to have this idea of morality as being like this abstract mathematical thing. And the problem is that these ideals can never actually be experienced in real life. You can never experience goodness in real life according to this worldview, because that goodness is pure and completely detached from anything to do with actual behavior. So here we go. Let me read here. So, for example, the Republic, Plato's Republic was this conception of the state and how the state should be the perfect state, pure and perfect state. We talked about this in the earlier sessions. The Republic, this is page 113 going into 114, is an ideal state because it is best, and therefore what a state should be. But it is also ideal in the sense that it is not and cannot concretely exist. The ideal state is itself a form to be participated in, approximated, imitated, but never consonant with the becoming, that is, the experience. The Republic is not in any way limited by the particular circumstances of human experience. Just as in the European conception, the philosophic and ethical progressiveness of the Christ image lies in its presentation of a model of moral perfection to be imitated but never reached. So the Republic represents the perfect order towards which the European state must continually advance. An idea as normative model, i.e. a model to be reached toward, is not simply modeled after the good, it is the embodiment of the good. The ideal is the actual good. That's good. The problems in the Euthyphro, the Apology, and the Crito, which are texts by Plato, are created by the discrepancy in the world of becoming between the moral and the natural. This problem is eliminated in the Republic. The state becomes totally moral because it is totally rational. Virtue is identified with objectification, spirit is reduced to matter, and the ability to manipulate it. Now, this is important. This mode of thought that has worked so well to produce the kind of technical and social order that Europeans desire has also created a moral and spiritual disaster. The formal religious statement has taken on the form of the rational state and has left Europeans no access to the necessary spiritual reservoirs of European morality. So then, toward the end of the chapter, page 178, what... Sorry, my son's getting his hair twisted, I think, downstairs. He's crying, bless him. But Marimba Ani makes a point that this kind of rationalistic religion is by necessity unspiritual. It has to be unspiritual. Why? Because let's read it here. Where are we? Where is it? But anyway, it's unspiritual because by necessity, spirituality is all about that which is... here we go. I'm sorry, I've got the quote here. So for the European mind, this is page 181. This will be the last, toward the end of the session now. For the European mind, operating outside of the rationalistic sphere means a loss of control. It necessitates the recognition of a power greater than itself. And such a possibility is contradictory to the European ultima rojo. So for the Europeans, everything has to be rational. It has to be rationalistic. Their version of rationalistic means can only be understood with the mind, not the body, not the senses and all that sort of stuff. And that, if you go outside of rationalism, then you're overstanding that there is a power that's bigger than you. There's something greater than you. There's something more than you, that you are within, part of, and underneath, kind of thing. And for the Europeans, they're like, no. We have to be able to control, and they're not gonna submit themselves to anything that's greater than themselves. And so Europeans are, back to the article, and so Europeans are faced with a dilemma. For religion has by definition to do with the awareness of the supernatural, i.e. a power that transcends the mortal self. It is a dilemma never escaped in European theology, and Europeans end up with an image of the all-powerful or supreme being as the most rational mind, which of course is their image of themselves. And the point there is that European religion in Europe, and by this as well, she doesn't say it here, but I would extend that to also scientism, because formal religion is not really that big in Europe and in the white world, more so in the USA, but in Europe and Western Europe and the UK, no one goes to church, and not many people really are that bothered about Christianity. But we have science is the new religion. Science is the new God. Everything is justified through the language and the concepts of science, because rationalism has removed God even out of the picture. But this of necessity then detaches Europeans and those who follow European ways. It detaches us from, as Marimba Ani calls it, the reservoirs of human morality. It detaches us from the connection with the cosmos, the connection with animals, trees, plants, ancestors, the ones not yet born, and so on, the forces, spiritual forces and elements and so forth. You can't have any access to that if you have this rationalistic, cerebral religion where God is seen as a mind only and everything else is denigrated. And so what you end up, religion is detached from cultural and social meaning. And what you end up with is the Europeans constantly trying to find rationalistic explanations for their religions, which is why you have all of these mind-numbingly boring conversations and debates about, okay, can you justify creation? Even one of the things that pops into my mind is, the whole thing about the Trinity. I used to go to Speaker's Corner here in Hyde Park a lot in London. And when I was a Christian or Bible believer, and I remember I'd go there, and the Muslims are part of this as well. They're, Marimba Ani makes the point that when you consider Muslim and Christian conflict, don't think of that as religious conflict. It's really ethnic conflict. That's all it is. It's not religious conflict, because the Muslims have got all the same foundations of their thought are the same kinds of foundations. I mean, for crying out loud, the Arabs, a lot of Arab philosophy and so forth was basically warming over of Greek philosophy, much to the embarrassment of Europeans. When the Europeans were in their so-called Dark Age, because they cut themselves off from Greek learning or Roman learning and so forth, it was the Arabs, it was the Muslims who went and, rediscovered all of those texts and put them into Arabic and stuff. But my point is that, what was my point again? Oh, gosh, sorry. My point is that, when I used to go to Speaker's Corner, and the Muslims, they knew, they would just be there like, hello, Aki, how are you? How are you, my brother? So, oh, you're a Christian. Okay, tell me one thing. And they would just go on the Trinity point, and they would, or either Trinity or this idea of Jesus being God and man, and they would just logic you to death. They would logic you to death. Like, all right, so if Jesus is God, who is he praying to? And you'd be like, what? Does God pray? They'll say, does God pray? Surely God doesn't pray. And you'd be like, no, well, yeah, but the Father's God. Oh, sure. And they'll be like, sure, I agree. The Father is God. They'll say, we won't call him Father, but yes, that person who Jesus is praying to, that's God. We agree. But Jesus is not God. And then the Christian will be like, no, Jesus is God. Yeah, but then they'll say, no, but does Jesus pray? And they'll be like, yes. But how can God pray? Because you don't understand, it's a mystery. And I had so much fun in those days. I mean, those Muslims helped me out of the whole Abrahamic religions, basically, because I was never going to become a Muslim. But they opened my eyes to the kind of. But anyway, my point there is that all of those kinds of debates about, well, what is God, what is creation, like, can you explain the Trinity in exact detail and so forth? All of those things are manifestations of this rationalistic conceptualization of religion. I'm pretty sure you won't find any examples of Africans prior to colonialism. I don't know, someone from the Yoruba nation trying to persuade someone from the Igbo nation that their view of spirituality and so forth was better than theirs and made more sense. You just won't find any of that sort of stuff. Apologetics. Why? I think mainly because of the sort of the groundings of those different spiritual systems. They were not grounded in rationality. They're not it wasn't about these abstract ideals and so forth that had to be rationalistically explained and so on and so forth. They were grounded in real life. They were grounded in experience. They were grounded in connection with the cosmos. They were grounded in connection with all of the different elements of the universe and the creation around us. So that's just something that I think I really liked. The last section, which I didn't get to, unfortunately, in the chapter, or I didn't read in enough detail, was about the techno-social order. It's only it's about 10 pages, and there's another little bit, but unfortunately, I didn't get to that bit. But that is pretty much the main things that I got from this chapter. I will end with one quote. So Marimba Ani gives one quote, which I think is really powerful in considering. So I've talked about African spiritual systems, and people often say, I've said it before, I say, well, if your spiritual systems were so good, then why did we get colonized? And it's a fair question. It's a fair question. One of the things that someone like John Mbiti, the Kenyan deceased, now transitioned theologian, said is that the problem with African spirituality, African philosophy, is that it has no concept of the far future, the long distant future. That's the problem, and that's what means it's unsatisfying for Africans, and it has to change. It has to we have to discover the future. Marimba Ani is like, no, sir, nope, because she makes the point, which is, I think she does talk about this techno-social order. She makes the point that this concept of time, this linear concept of time, whereby there's this distant, never to be reached future, undefined future that is at the heart of Christianity and Islam, to a lesser extent Judaism and scientism as well. We look at all these conversations about the environment. This future concept is actually debilitating, and it's de-spiritual, it's desacralizing, and it's part of this whole process of detaching humans from the cosmos. So she rejects John and BT's criticism about this alleged need for us to, to discover the future, as if we didn't know the future was there. But what she does say something which is really important on page 195. She says this. She says, in African religion and in many other primary religious formulations, it is the spiritual and emotional needs of the people within the culture that are served. At the same time, the values of the culture are sanctioned and the mechanisms for its continuance are sacralized. Spiritual philosophical conceptions such as ancestor communion, which help to explain the universe as a spiritual whole in which all life and being are periodically regenerated, give the African an emotional security and confidence that the European lacks. So that's important, first of all, to say that, our spiritual systems, particularly with the cyclical conceptions of time and the fact that eternity isn't something that's over there in the future that we're never going to get to. Eternity, we experience eternity in our rituals. We experience eternity in our, in our dance, in our, you know what I mean? When we experience sacred time through all of these things that we do, storytelling, experientially, we experience it. And so because of that, we're not terrified about the future. We're not terrified about things, and we're confident. We understand that it's fine. Like, yes, one day I will no longer be here in the physical, but it's fine because that's not the end. Do you know what I mean? Everything's a cycle. But anyway, then Marimba Ani says this, but such conceptions did not prepare the African nor her Native American or Oceanic counterparts to deal politically with the aggression of the European. These conceptions, i.e. our conceptions, have not been used successfully in the defense of culture. Non-European religions were not fashioned for worldwide acceptance nor for international propaganda. There is no superficial, merely rhetorical component of these religions. Ethnologically, both European and non-European religions serve the ideological needs of the cultures in question as defined by their members. The radical difference between them issues from the differences in these two sets of ideology. One is based on the pursuit of world domination. The others seek to use the forces of the universe to ensure a harmonious existence. The two types of ideology involve two different conceptions of power. Europeans are culturally nurtured with a keen political sense that is simultaneously defensive and aggressive. The Utamarojo comes with an awareness of others. It is therefore intensely political. And, that's not a critique per se, but it's just a statement of fact. It is a statement of fact that that's what's happened here. Our spiritual systems, she argues, didn't prepare us for what was to come. Whereas the Europeans, they are all about that. Their whole aim was domination and control and so forth, and they were ready. They came on our shores and they were ready to conquer, ideologically, culturally, and militarily and politically, whereas we didn't have that element in our thinking per se. So I don't know. That just got me thinking with regard to knowing the strengths of our spiritual systems and so forth, but also kind of recognizing that there's work, and this is our job. This is what we're here for. Do you know what I mean? Our ancestors, our great ancestors, as Abina said last week, we must venerate our ancestors because without them we wouldn't be here. They must have done something right. Otherwise I wouldn't be here right now. All this, everything physically and spiritually and emotionally, whatever about me comes from them, and we're part of them. I'm going to be one of them soon as well. But here we are in this time right now, and it's our job to do the necessary work to adapt and prepare us to do what we need to do in order to end this disaster of the Ma'afa and recalibrate the world, recalibrate our lands, and recalibrate our people, reposition everything for us to be able to, you know, destroy this world and build a world that you know is going to be, yeah, you know what I'm saying. Anyway, that's what I like. So yeah, really, this chapter was heavy going. I must say, 90 pages, and I did struggle at times to get through it. I didn't even finish all of it properly, but it is. I just wish I'd have read this book 15 years ago, that chapter 15 years ago, because I would have cut out a lot of having to learn certain lessons with regard to religion and so forth by being in them. I would have been able to step back and be like, I get it. No, it's fine. It's fine. You know, this is what's going on here. You can tell me about this prophet, that prophet. That's fine. I understand, guys. You're just pushing your ideology on me, and I'm not having it. You know. So there we go. Thank you, guys. Thanks for your input. I'll come to a few of the comments here just while we're here. Yeah, exactly. That's what I just said there. That point, that's Afro-pessimism. What I just said there is Afro-pessimism, and I love Afro-pessimism in that sense that that basic message that this world has to end in order for African people to be liberated is a great message. And it's absolutely, that's it. That's what has to happen. And yeah, that's that. Yeah, so we experience eternity through dance story. Yeah, that's you know, when she there's a point she makes. She basically, what she says is that you know, in African conceptions, philosophy, yes, we have the linear time, we have the profane time that's just going from here to there, you know, and now it's here, now it's there, and you know, we have that normal regular time, but we also have sacral time, I think she calls it, sacred time, which intersperses into our experiences through the rituals, through the dance, through the this, that, and the other, you know. And I think we know that. I often think of house music and how a lot of house music back in the day, maybe now still, but I certainly remember a lot of house music, say in the 90s and noughties, there were a lot of songs that were kind of really playing on the fact that in that atmosphere of the dance, of the club, in that atmosphere of the music, the euphoric atmosphere, you're experiencing something that's much bigger than just, I'm just in a club listening to music. You're experiencing a different dimension. You're experiencing a different state of mind, a different consciousness. And that's what I think of with regard to that. You know, that's just a sort of small little taste of the fact that, yes, we are experiencing eternity. We're experiencing the divine in those moments. And even Christians understand this. The Pentecostals, charismatic church and all that sort of stuff, they've brought all that in. They took from Voodoo and you know, other traditions. We look at the Azusa Street, and you look at the history of the Azusa Street, which is like the birth of the Pentecostal movement. You'll see that when you read the descriptions of what was happening, if you could be reading about Voodoo, you could be reading about some of these things, do you know what I mean? That some of those African spiritual systems, because that's what they brought in. That's what they brought into the Christian church. And yeah, it's oh nice. Leah Boggs said she's listening to house music in the car with my husband now. Yes, I am. House music needs to make a comeback, man. I've always been into house music. I love house music. In the UK here, we had a period of time in the 90s where house was kind of getting very big. Garage music, house music was getting really big, but it's kind of died away. But I like the 4/4 just, you know, the 4/4 beat is just so powerful and just ethereal, and you know, all them ones there. Then Leah, you said something as well. I think for African spiritual traditions, it just is. Christianity is based on faith. African spiritual traditions are based on knowing. That's the way I see it as a person who practices an African spiritual tradition. Yeah, that's one of my. I need, you know, I'm very cerebral. When I'm reading this stuff, you know, this Marimba Ani critiquing European thought, I'm kind of critiquing myself because I'm very linear in my thinking, very logical, can be rationalistic and so forth. And I need to transition. You know what I mean? I need to not transition. I need to, you know, start to practice some of our ancestral traditions for show. Cool. And then, yeah, back to Tafari Melisizwe said, shout out to the Aya Educational Institute. So if you guys are looking for something else to listen to or whatever now, check out this guy. Check out Wekesa Madzimoyo. I don't know anything about him, but the people who have mentioned this person's name are people that I respect. And so, yeah, I've got him in my watch later list. So I'm definitely going to be checking out some of his teachings later. And then, sorry, Dr. Julia Robertson Esquire, you said a long time ago, you said that they, either Europeans and others, know that their behavior is an unethical use of power, but they convince themselves that their written scripture justifies violence. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, all right, guys. Yeah, thank you for joining me, man. That's been a real pleasure. Again, if you haven't already, just do subscribe to the channel, do like the video as well, and if you would like to join the mailing list, I'm a little bit behind on sending out the videos actually, but every time I do a stream on here, eventually what I'll do is cut the stream down a little bit on the YouTube so that there's only a portion of it left, and then the full version is on the Substack, which you just have to sign up to the Substack, and then you'll get the access to the full versions. You can do it for free. You'll get access for sure. But if you do want to financially support as well, then you can do that as well. But the main thing is just keep the knowledge sharing going. Let's just keep the ideas flowing, and let's do this. Just to say, next week I'm just going to do chapter 3. Chapter 3 is only 30 pages. I was foolhardily, I was thinking of just tagging it on to the end of this one, but then I started reading about it because the chapter is called the aesthetic, the power of symbols, and I thought, oh yeah, I could probably do that in a few minutes. I started reading it, and I realized, no, this is not. It might only be 30 pages, but it's 30 deep pages. So that's what we're going to be doing next week, talking about aesthetics and symbols. And I think that's going to be an important one because, we're just talking about music. We're just talking about art to an extent here. And I'm really looking forward to that chapter because I think it's going to be one of those chapters that's going to get us really thinking in creative ways and cosmic ways, joining the dots between music and art and dance and, philosophy and spirituality and so forth. So, yeah, man. Make sure you join us next Saturday at 3 p.m., 15th of April. Oh, and Leah said that I went on a visit to Harriet Tubman's home in MD. What's MD? Michigan? I always struggle with these when you guys put the abbreviations of your states. I'm like, right, is that Massachusetts, Michigan, Missouri? Anyway, this visit to Harriet Tubman's home, okay, by Baba Wekesa a couple of years ago. Yeah, so look at me, I've barely heard of him. So that is, Maryland, of course. Yeah, sorry, I should have known that. Maryland. All right, guys. All right, Maryland. Thank you. So yeah, one day I'll go to I've only ever been to the US once. I went to New York for like a day on a stopover I'd been to Latin America, various countries in Latin America, and we had a stopover in New York before coming back to London, and that was great. It was like being in a hip hop movie video, like all the big skyscrapers and that. It's like, damn, Manhattan and so on. And I remember as well going to a McDonald's, and all the people in there were black, and they're all speaking Spanish, and I was like, I've literally just come from like a bunch of Spanish-speaking countries, and now what's going on? So that was I didn't really know that too tough about like, the African diaspora, the dynamics in the United States. But yeah, I'm looking forward to one day going to the US again, and it's going to be a very carefully crafted visit when I do go. New Orleans is one place I definitely want to go to, and some of them southern places I'm more interested in, to be honest, than some of the northern ones. But so it go. All right. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody. Hope you've enjoyed yourself. Hope you've kind of got something out of the session. Yeah, apology accepted, Leah. Go back to enjoying your house music in the car. You get me? And yeah, look forward to seeing you guys all next week as well. All right. So Avro H and every one of you, Leah Books, Tito District, my sister, Jatem Ross, who have we got here? Tafara, Melisizwe, Anthony Dandridge, Desalines, Everything is Politics, who couldn't stay with us, but that's fine. She'll catch up. All of you guys have a wonderful rest of your Saturday afternoon and evening, morning. And yes, Matt, yes, I will see you next week. All right. Take care and peace out. Ciao, as my Akan people would say. All right. Peace.